Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? I never know. Hello, can y'all hear me? All right, let's invite Karen. Okay, and there we go. There you are.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yay,
Yes, I can hear you. Yay. This is the first time I've ever done a live thing, so.
You did great. You already requested to join. I was like, oh, it's already there. I don't know how to find her. This is so good.
Excellent. Excellent.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. How's the weather? You're in Arizona, right?
It is, I haven't been outside this afternoon, but but it's pretty warm. It's starting to get really warm in the afternoon, like 90s. But in the mornings and the evenings, it's like nice and balmy, cool.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
I grew up in like a swampy area, so like desert heat is always like, I don't know, I just love it. I think because it feels really different. I remember the first time I went to the desert with a friend and I was like, it's so hot and everything's brown. And she's like, are you okay? She's like, who hurt you? And I was like, everywhere is like wet and green where I'm from and like horrible. Oh, wait, are you still there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
So I'm going to introduce you to everyone who's joined. I'm so thrilled to have Karen Chow, who is a Taiwanese American author. I'm reading off of to make sure I'm missing it. She started writing novels as a college sophomore at Arizona State University while earning a degree in electrical engineering. That is so cool. One of my aunts is an electrical engineer. She wrote and queried several books, mostly YA fiction, before discovering a love for writing middle grade contemporary fiction. And Miracle is your first novel that was published, right? Not your first one you wrote, but your first published. There we go.
First public novel.
Yeah, pop it up. I'm proud of that baby. This is such a beautiful cover, by the way. Whoever the art on it is so
I know.
stunning.
I was really lucky. I really love the cover. It was done by Olga Lee, who is hired by my editor and their team, and she's Russian Chinese. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That is so cool. I was like, that's like in her name. Did she do all of these like beautiful illustrations here? I feel like this is like one of the best parts of middle grade is you also get like little pictures in between. Did she do those as well?
So she didn't. That was Vera Rosenberry. I think my editor, Christy Taviano, had a connection with her and worked with her before on some other picture books, and so she hired Vera to do like the chapter headings and stuff like that, and they're really pretty. I love them.
I love them because I felt like they visually framed the next part of the chapter, like the chapter where you've got the music teacher and there's the bus. I'll have to find it so people can see it, but I think it's like it's such a beautiful, like, I was like, we're about to get into some musical lessons because there it is. Like, just like this visual is so fun. I think because I am visual, so I love those little Easter eggs that I was like, I think this is going to be in it.
Yeah.
It's going to happen in the chapter.
It's like the Harry Potter when you're like, oh, there's a picture of a dog with 3 heads, so it's got to be coming.
It's happening. I use chapter titles, but I write YA, so I don't get pictures with them.
Oh, that's kind of sad.
I'm like, I know it's a contemporary book, but we're putting in chapter titles because I love a wink. I love winking about what's to come.
Yeah, for sure.
So you started in YA when you were writing, and then you shifted to middle grade.
Yeah.
What to you? And I love asking like sometimes writerly questions, sometimes process questions. What is it to you that's the difference between those two and like writing them and finding that middle grade voice?
It's the voice, like for sure. I think I was never actually very good at young adults voice. Yeah. And everything that I wrote that was supposedly young adult was actually more towards like the upper middle grade space. And so yeah, there's just like I have a couple of critique partners who are young adult, and like GF Miller. She's just very, very punchy, like boom, 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 boom. Everything's
Yeah.
happening so quickly. And I just don't think I have that kind of wit.
Well, there's a tenderness to middle grade
Yeah,
that I think you capture, and I think there's a tenderness in this book that you really capture. So
thanks.
and so I have the opposite problem actually with like when I try to write sweet and tender, it still comes out with like f bombs in it. Like I don't know, like I'm gonna write a sweet tender love story, and then I'm like, you know what? Not that 12-year-olds don't necessarily have moments where they accidentally drop an F bomb, but it's not like a 17-year-old.
Oh, that's true. That's very
Yeah,
true.
it is
I
just
also
different.
think like I read a lot. So I was as a kid I was like I really struggled with English. So I didn't
Okay.
I mean my parents are from Taiwan. They
Okay.
spoke Chinese at home and Mandarin at home, and
Yeah.
I grew up learning Mandarin first. And so like when I was in
Yeah.
kindergarten, the ESL, I really
Mm.
hated English class. Like I didn't
Mm.
like it at all. And so I
Mm-hmm.
just kept struggling, but I read a lot. And middle grade is kind of where I landed on. Like I read middle grade for a really long time. And
Yeah.
I continue to read middle grade now as I'm like in it. And my daughter is like 11, so she's like right there. And so
Aww.
we read a lot of stuff together. I read aloud to my kids. And the middle grade, the way that the chapters are, the way that everything is, like the plot goes, like it's not as drawn out as young adult. And so
Yeah.
so like even a 5-year old 6-year old can still keep into get into the story.
Yeah, you can read aloud a middle grade book to a 5 or 6-year-old and they will absolutely follow it, even if it isn't something they could necessarily read on their own, depending on like what level of reader they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's like an elegant kind of simplicity, which I love and I don't have. Like I don't do. I
but
go
you have.
very Victorian and like overdrawn and maudlin with everything. So I am in such admiration, especially with this book, because it's about a girl who's a violinist. And feel free to say your own spin on this, because this is your time to shine. Dealing with the grief of both being part of the team caretaking for her father as he has cancer, and then dealing with his death and like what that grief means and what that grief means for her music. And that's a very heavy theme, right? Like that's like dealing with grief and the ways in which we live in a culture where grief is a kind of unspeakable idea, or we have unspeakable feelings or actions associated with that. And then like marrying that with the language of a middle grade novel, which is like that elegant, simple, direct prose, that like not overly drawn out plot, feels like such a balancing act. And I'd love to hear how you did that.
Oh, oh
You're like, I don't know.
I don't know. It, part of it was a little bit magical. Like it came out really fast. I wrote it during NaNoWriMo, so National Novel Writing Month in November of 2016. And this was my first middle grade that I'd ever written. And it just kind of came out. Like I had this idea, I had the character, I knew what she was going through, and I knew that she needed to go through
Yeah.
this journey. I guess I watched
Yeah.
Bachelor, Bachelorette, and they say
I
journey
mean,
a
I
lot.
love the word journey. Yeah. I'm definitely a millennial, but I love the word journey, even
Yeah.
though it's been wildly overused. I
Yeah.
still love it.
But she oh sorry, what's this? Oh, the unspeakable. So like I do feel like I've gone through grief myself. Like my dad
Yeah.
passed away when I was 21 or almost 22. And like
It's
just
still
being,
very young to lose a parent. Like, as
yeah,
like you're technically an adult, but it's still very young to.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like all of those feelings that you experience when you've lost somebody that you love, like it just there's like so many emotions in that, and it's
Yeah.
hard to convey that um to somebody else. And it's almost like there's like a handshake, like a level of trust that you have to have there when you tell people about your experience. And
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I also feel like as somebody who's experienced grief, like it kind of hits you at weird times. And so like you get emotional
Mm-hmm.
at random times. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to
Yeah.
explain that kind of thing. And so I was hoping that it kind of came across in Amy, the
Oh,
main
you
character.
did. You did a great job with Amy in those moments where, and I think it's really beautifully done that sometimes the trigger is really obvious to us. Sometimes it's really obvious on the outside, right? She has this violin that her dad got her, or was like one of the last things he helped get her. So, like, it makes sense that that violin would be a grief trigger for her.
Yeah.
But then there are these other moments where they do feel like they're out of nowhere and they're not something outsiders can easily identify. And they're sometimes not things we can easily identify. And that makes them, I think, even harder because it seems like when it's centered on the violin, everyone kind of gets it. They're like, this is a bonding thing you had with the dad, your dad. Like, this is like something that he gave you, like in the end, like it makes sense. But then there are these other things that are like, why is burning the cookies a trigger? Like, why is that the last straw for you? Doesn't always make sense even to the person experiencing grief. And
Yeah.
I thought it was so beautiful to show that to young readers and to let them kind of live in that experience in
Yeah.
a way that still felt very age appropriate.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like it's that way with any like life experience. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody has their own things that they're dealing with, and you just don't know when something's going to trigger them, and you don't know how they're going to react, and you just kind of have to give. Especially, I feel like in this book, like especially people had to give her a little bit of grace, and I feel
Yes.
like that's what we need to do in real life too.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I feel like she had to give herself a little bit of grace. I think that was
Yeah.
the person who needed to give her the most grace was
Yeah.
herself.
We're our own worst critic.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's also a lot of really beautiful violin and music throughout. How did you bring in like an auditory art while you're writing a book, right? Like you can't like insert a Spotify track, right? You did that really well.
Thanks. I'd have played music for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that helped. I think trying to phrase the words and use the words, like I love playing with words. Trying to make it sound like it's a musical thing is also what I tried to do here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
I
like found musical rhythm in the words and in the sounds, even though it was like sort of having those moments of prose poetry while you were working.
Yeah, and there was early on when I was starting to incorporate like some of the musical terms. I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if she just used this term for as a substitute for this emotion or this feeling?
Yeah.
And so I tried to start doing that in the
she uses
draft.
divisi a lot, which is it's fun because it felt really natural to a kid, right? It feels really natural to a kid to be like, I play a lot of an instrument, so I'm going to use this word and apply it because it makes sense to me.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then like you could pick it up from context clues. So that was very cool, even in terms of like I feel like you could have picked that up even if like music wasn't a language you spoke. I think you made it really accessible.
Oh,
what was your good. Yeah. So you played a ton of instruments. You played in the back. What's like hold on, you like list it in the back. All of you were like you're a band geek and you played.
I'm super.
Oh wait, maybe it was. Yeah. What do you feel like your instrument? Maybe either your favorite or your one that was your like the most you. You know, I had a piano teacher who said like there's instruments that sound like you that feel right when you play them. What was that for you?
Probably the piano.
Mm-hmm.
I think. I mean, it was also the instrument I played the longest, but I do feel like towards the ends, when I was older, I was just drawn to it. Like I actually had quit lessons, I think around 10th grade. And then my teacher was like, oh, we're doing this cool thing where we're doing like 5 parts in one song And so it was like 5 pianos playing one song. It's called like 10 hands, 10
Mm.
hand songs. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, I want to be part of it. And so I started up lessons again because that was a requirement. And then I did that. Um, I,
That's so cool because piano so rarely gets to be collaborative in that way.
yeah,
So that's really beautiful that,
yeah.
yeah, that they found that.
Yeah, I think that's something that I missed as a piano player.
Mhm.
Um, like you just don't like. I'm at home. My daughter plays piano, and she's just, it's a lonely artist,
It's
lonely.
like right. It is a lot like writing, where it's just you and your instrument. I mean, like it's not you and the page.
Yeah,
It's in many ways you and the page, you and the page of music, you and the keys, and like
yeah,
you in your own head, and you trying to like tune that emotional state with what you're expressing. Yeah, no, it's very like writing in that way,
for
and it can
sure.
feel isolating and lonely. I think
Yeah, a little
if
bit.
you
And
like
so, like,
interacting.
yeah, when
Yeah.
you have that chance, like you want to do a duet with somebody, or you want to do the 5 piano thing. I was like, yes, let's do this. Because like in band, you're one of many, many, many people. I played
Yeah.
flute when I was in 5th grade, and I continued into high school. I played in the marching band, and then I went to ASU and I played piccolo, and
Oh my
it
gosh.
was just it was just like a big family environment, and that's something that
Hmm.
I didn't get as a piano player. But I don't think I ever connected with the flute as well as I did with the piano.
Right.
Um, Maybe because I didn't take lessons, but it was just I did the flute because it felt like I was part of something,
Hmm.
and I could play it, and I wasn't the best at it, but I could still play.
Yeah, it gave
Um,
you a sense of community off of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that same vein, I was in a handbell choir. So you know those
I
like
love him. I
like
love
the,
handbells. Like I
yeah.
feel like that is. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, good.
We were like forced to play them in middle school, and I was like, "Yeah, this sucks." And I was like,
But this is amazing.
"You're like, I'm having so much fun. Just don't tell anyone about your weird interest."
Right? Right? It's just like so when I was in middle school, they were playing I think they played Newsies like the last full week um
Mm-hmm.
of the school year. I think I was in 8th grade or 9th grade, and everybody else was like, "This is so stupid. Why are we watching Newsies like 3 times?" And I'm like, "This is amazing."
This
But
is incredible.
but out loud, I'm like, "Yeah, this is so stupid." But in my head, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I love it." But yeah,
I remember
something.
that with like historical novels where I loved a historical novel and then I realized no one else in class liked them and I was like, I'm gonna keep this thought to myself for now.
Just mine right now.
An inside thought. This is also why I love
Yeah,
middle grade age because you're like still a kid, right? You're still like unself-conscious in these moments and then you become aware and self-conscious the way a teenager is and then you're suddenly like, maybe I don't share that.
maybe I keep
Maybe the
it to
thing that makes
myself.
me is uncomfortable and I don't know what to do with that.
For sure. For sure. I think I also like that middle grade space where it's like you have all of these conflicting emotions that
Mm-hmm.
are sometimes cool and sometimes not cool, and you're
Often
trying to
not cool. Yeah.
figure out how to be yourself, and it just sometimes it doesn't go very well.
No, it often doesn't. But I love that age because it is kind of just a lot of chaos in a really beautiful way.
Yeah.
Right? Like Amy's trying to figure out how to be someone who's grieving the loss of her dad while also still being a friend. And like that's really hard. Like that's not an easy thing for like an older person to ask, much less when you're, 11 or 12 and you're like, I don't even know how to be in grief, much less I'm still learning how to be a friend and we're all changing and
Yeah.
that can be really, really scary.
Yeah.
Was that hard to remember those feelings or is it because you have an 11-year-old in the house that it was like really easy to access?
Um, it was I did okay. So there were when I was critiquing it with my critique partners. They're called the
Mm-hmm.
chargelings, because we use chargers instead of pens.
Cute.
And they
I'm sorry, I need a minute for that pun. It's really good. I'm
yes,
okay now.
the chargelings versus the inklings. Yeah, That was
Oh, that's so
the
good.
brainchild of
Okay.
Keith
I
Pond.
wish I could tap a heart under that. Like because I'm going live, I can't add that. That's so good.
But
Tell me about your critique group. This is
yes,
incredible.
so when I was critiquing it with them, there were parts where they're like, oh, she's reacting too old, like she's being too
Yeah.
mature. Or
Yeah.
even some of the side characters, like, oh, this just sounds way too mature for 11-year-old boy. And then there were parts where they're like, this sounds way too young. Like she's acting like a third grader versus, a sixth
Yeah.
grader. And so it was an interesting balance, like trying to find that space, that right level of complication, and also the right level of awareness.
Yeah. And also taking into account that like obviously not every 11-year-old is the same, not every 12-year-old is the same. And so like where their dial is set can be, you know,
Yeah.
in some places more than their peers and in some places lower because it's harder in like certain lanes, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think we think of maturity as like one or the other rather than like, oh, they really understand other people's feelings, but maybe they don't understand their own, right? Like I feel like I was like that where I could read other people, but like the language for my own feelings was like question. I don't know, man.
I don't know what I'm feeling.
This is a lot. This is a lot, and I can't believe you're asking this of me.
True. Yes.
Yeah. The big middle grade. Can you tell me more about, I was just thinking about how you loved playing instruments together and then you have this really great critique group. So even with writing, you found that community. Can you describe what that was like for you?
I hopped around from a couple of different critique groups. So when I started writing, I was in college, I was studying engineering, and then I had a really good friend, Christy Williams. She was like, oh, I got this book called How to Be a Weekend Novelist. And it was written by a professional who was like,
Yeah.
oh, you can write a novel on your weekends. And so she's like, I don't want to do it by myself. And I was like, okay, well, I'll do it with you. So we started going through like the exercises and stuff together. And then she was basically my first critique partner. And we didn't know what we were doing. We were friends. We were like, oh, this sounds great. Or, oh, this is not the right vocabulary word. And so
you were learning how to build that critique language that you've never done.
Yeah. And so like she was my first critique partner. And then from there, I kind of hopped around. There was like back in like 2005, I want to say, there was like a big push for I think it was like meet.com, where you could meet up with like strangers and do like collective things. And so there were a bunch of writing groups, and I was like, okay, I'll try it. And it was like meeting at a stranger's house with all these other strangers. And I'm like, it's probably very dangerous, which is very dangerous. But also like, I'm glad I was an adult and had my wits about me. But like, it was a very safe space, and I got some good feedback from there. But it just was like, it was so temporary. Like you would come, and sometimes like the host would always be there, but like everybody else was kind of shifting. And so I tried to find a more permanent group, and I was into one of them was a branch off of this like church group that I was in, and these women were writing novels. Like in the church group, that most of them were doing like articles and stuff, so you would read 3 pages on the spot and get feedback right on the spot. And I was like, I can't do this with like, I mean, a chapter is like 6 to 10 pages
minimum.
And so I was like, I can't do this. So a bunch of us split off, and it was with them for probably 5 or 6 years, like a really long time. And I really liked them. And they gave a lot of helpful feedback. But there was a point where GF Miller, my friend Blinka, she had posted on Facebook, she's like, I've written 3 novels, and I wrote 3 novels this year, that year 2016, and I know, and I'm querying the first one, and I was like,
so like, I'm a professional, and like, I've never done that. I just feel like, in case for anyone else in the audience that just had a hard stop moment.
Yeah, she's like an incredibly fast writer.
Yeah, some people are fast and prolific, and I'm in awe of it. Like, I'm always in awe that someone can just be like, "Yep, I just go," and I'm like,
me too. Oh my gosh, here I am, month by month. But
bird by bird over here.
Yeah, really, seriously, bird by bird. And she and I was like, I had been revising like the same young adult fantasy for probably 4 years. Yeah. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, if I really want to get published, if that's really my dream, like, I need to like snap out of it and start moving. So I asked her, I was like, I'm looking, or do you have a critique group? Like, what are you doing different than I am? And she was like, well, I'm in a critique group with Mary Lambert. Mary Lambert had she had a book deal. She had an agent. She had a book deal with Scholastic, and her book was coming out in like, I think a few months after I met Blinka. And I was like, oh my gosh. So she like knows the process, and she knows what she's
it's like doing. Inside baseball. You're like, how does the sausage get made, right?
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot more of a sense of it now because of the internet, but that's so much more recent than I think most people realize, like these resources being available. Yeah.
And I just felt like, you know, somebody's been through it, like this woman has been through it, and she kind of knows, she kind of has a little bit more of a pulse on the industry side. And so I was like, I think I need to glean some information from her. And so I asked Link, I was like, do you have room in your group? And she's like, yeah, I think we could do it. There was one woman who was out of town for a year, and so I basically like replaced her, but not really replaced her because she came back.
You sublet her spot.
Yeah.
But then she got to come back.
And so I was like, I think this is my way in. It's going to be amazing, and it really was amazing. Like, Mary had studied at Vermont College of Fine Arts, VCFA.
Where close the window because I think it's being really loud, but I'm listening to you. I just don't.
Okay, and so
everyone to like pick up all these yard sounds. You know, the weather is nice.
So she had like the experience and the training, like how to plot well. What's the purpose of this chapter? What's the purpose? What's, you know, what is scene,
right?
Yeah, what is the driving emotion and want of this character? Like all of those official things that I had heard about, but I never really implemented as well. And so I feel like she really, really helped. And then, and so just being with them, they were
it's different when someone asks you the question directly, right?
What?
I think it's different when someone asks you and like ties it really practically to your, like, I know that you're supposed to know what the emotion is in the scene, but this is the first time someone is asking me exactly where the problem is, right? Because sometimes you are naturally doing it well, and then sometimes it's like, oh, this is the moment where it went off the rails.
Right.
It can be really helpful when you're being specific.
Yeah, and she was like, she and Glinka and there's another girl, Tracy, like sometimes, because I love words and I like writing pretty things, and sometimes they're like, well, this chapter is really pretty, and it you know, it shows
just a bunch of people sitting around eating pizza having fun.
Conveys the emotion really well, but what's the purpose of this scene? What's it actually doing for the plot?
Cartoon blinks. What?
They're just talking really nice things to each other. So it's been like being with them like really helped me hone like a lot of the editing issues that I've been having. Like I just didn't know how to edit. And so I just really stress the importance of critique partners. Like they really help you.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great way to like write with other people around rather than just always alone with the keyboard, which we do too, you know, but sometimes it's nice to not feel alone and not feel alone with your characters, I think. So you've worked on a lot of books for a really long time, and you worked on this one. So this is a 2016 NaNoWriMo. It's 2023, which is wild to me. How did that happen?
Well, we lost 2 years, okay?
We did, yeah. They're the blackout year. They happen so much that they just wiped clean off your brain.
Right? Just
Everything happens
skipped
so
over.
much.
Skipped over those 2 years.
For sure. You're like, I'm still that age though, right? Like it's like we start counting. Yeah. How do you sustain work? Like, and I've talked to a lot of writers who didn't give up, because it's funny that you're like, oh, a writer is someone who's able to pick up the next thing and like keep working to be published. But then there's also a lot of people who have persisted. Even the last picture book we did, like it was Marla Frazee worked on it for 20 years trying to get it right, like just kind of kept putting it down, kept picking up, kept putting it down, kept picking it up.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many of those stories there are. So I want to know what kept you going, or what kept you picking it up and not quitting on it.
I think I like somehow deep inside, like I knew that this was the one. And also because I had so much emotion invested in the character and the story, and there's so much more personal than the other books that I'd ever written. And I was like, I am willing to stick with it. And so I wrote it really fast. And then I edited it with my critique partners probably about 6 months, and then I submitted it to Pitch Wars. I don't know, you know what Pitch Wars is?
I do.
Yes. And so I submitted to Pitch Wars, and I got picked up unofficially by Cindy Baldwin and Amanda Rosenhill. And they were like when they wrote to me, they're like, we are in tears.
Oh,
this is making us cry. And I was like, okay, this is good, because that means the emotion is coming through, everything that I want is coming through. And so they gave me a couple of, I was basically doing Pitch Wars along with all the other mentees, but just on my own. And so I had the edit letter from them. I edited for 2 passes. I think the first one was 6 weeks, the last one was 2 weeks. And towards the end, they were like, somebody dropped out of the agent showcase. Do you want to replace them? And I was like, okay. And so it was really great. And then agent showcase went up. There was still a lot of disappointments, because like I got a lot of feedback saying, oh, the pacing is too slow. It's just too sad. And it was just like, and then
it felt like stuff you didn't want to change to the core of the book, right? Like, it is a book about grief. It's gonna be sad.
It's gonna be sad.
You're not gonna make a happy book about grief, and that's appropriate.
Right.
There's hope. It's a very hopeful book about grief, but I wouldn't say like it's a happy book about grief.
Right. It was actually sadder. Which is kind of crazy. But it was sadder because it
is really hard. Yeah.
And it dwelled a lot on her dad and like all the flashbacks she had of him. And so the format was a little bit different in that draft. And then so then I went back to Cindy and Amanda and was like, this is the feedback that I'm getting. Like, they're saying the pacing was a little slow. It's too sad. And so Amanda was like, okay, so you need to make, she's had the same problem with one of her books, and she's like, you need to infuse some like joy. Like, there's joy in the end. There's still joy in life, even though somebody is gone. And so I was like, okay. So I rewrote a little bit of it, like edited it and put in more. And Cindy was like, there's DV Pit on Twitter, which I think is now defunct too, which is sad. But
I did the first one, I think in 2015? Yeah, 2016.
Yeah. So I did it in 2018. And so she was like, I think she had gone her agent through DV Pit, and she's like, I think your story is like one of those softer action stories, like where it's very character driven and not as, it's not a fantasy action adventure fantasy.
Yeah, it's not like a high action plot, but there's still a lot of emotional growth. And that's like the core of the book.
And so so she's like, I think your book would be perfect for DV Pit. So I did DV Pit, and that's how I got my agent Andrea, who's amazing, and Andrea Cascardi, and then and she had me edit a little bit, and then we went on submission pretty quickly, and we got a lot of rejections with like, oh, you know, this is great, but I have another book that's like it, or it's really well written, but it just doesn't fit our lists. And so
Right.
I was like, okay. And by that time I had actually started writing a different book, and so I hadn't read it in a really long time. So like there was distance, I think at least 6 months of distance before we got an answer from Christy Taviano, who was like, I love the voice, I love the concept, I have some reservations, come back to me if you don't get any bites, and so getting offers or deals. And so we went back to her, and she gave me like a 3-page edit letter, and basically it's an R&R, and she wanted me to change,
which for those of you who do or don't know, it's a revise and resubmit.
Yeah, and so she wanted a completely different timeline. She wanted the themes to be a little bit different, like not so much focused on her bond with her dad, but more focused on her bond with her mom, because
right, the one she has to build.
Because she was basically saying like, and she was spot on, like now that I wrote it and see it, like her dad is gone, like you can mourn that relationship forever, but in the end, it's the people who are still around you who are going to be the ones who are helping you, and are the ones who love you and care about you the most. And those are the relationships that matter in the present day. And so I was like, you know what? That's so true. So I wrote the thing completely over. And it took like 7 months because I'm slow at writing.
That's still not that slow, but yes, it's slower than 1 month, but it's still not that slow.
True. Yeah, I think last year it took me like 11 months to write a book. So
yeah, it's like they take however long they take, I found.
yes. And so so I wrote it. It took her some time to get back to it. And then she was like, I want to give you an offer. I really loved everything that you did. You followed my edit letter. And
I'm really good at that.
I was like, yes, I incorporated everything she wanted.
Yeah.
And
but it also sounds like you felt like it made the story stronger as well. Like it made the story what you wanted it to be, even if you didn't see it at first, which is nice.
Yeah, and I also felt like the distance really helped. Like when I was rewriting, I actually was like, what does she do? Because remember how in the book, she can tell what Rio's thinking by the way he's tapping or doing stuff to like he's expressing
him, and and she can read his expressions of feelings in like the way he physicalizes them or like rhythms them. It's
and
there's
so
a lot of like auditory cues she picks up on, which makes sense. She's a musician. She's like, I hear that, I see that. That's how I'm used to reading, right? That's how I'm used to reading people and music.
And so like those things, I completely forgotten all of the things that he did. Like, what does slow and steady mean? So I'm like searching in my own document, slow and steady. What does that mean? Sad, happy. And so, and I'm like searching on tapping
Notes
or
to self.
drumming.
Oh goodness. Yeah.
So that was interesting. But but that's how much distance. That's how much distance there was between like me getting R&R and then revising it. And so,
But sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need to step outside the book to be able to keep going, I found, rather than always staying like in the forest. And like sometimes you need to be in the trees, sometimes you need to see the whole forest and understand what you're doing, and sometimes learning to like bounce back and forth between those states is not natural, so it takes a lot of practice to like get in and out of it. I found and the more you practice, the easier it does get, but
that's for sure.
It's not natural.
It's
just not.
It's not. And I do think that like so I started, I mean, it's been like 20 something years since I started writing. And I think that
Yeah.
going through like a lot of
And that's
critique
really
groups.
beautiful, that like persistence and that resilience of not giving up is
Yeah.
something you should be really proud of. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
But like all of that, all of those years of like feedback and taking
Hmm.
it as like, it's not a critique on you. Like you're
No.
not terrible just because you didn't convey this correctly. Like all
Yeah.
of those things. And partially my profession too. Like I know that if something is wrong, it's not a reflection on my ability. It's just that
No.
I have to fix something. And so I
Yeah.
think that that translated like just the experience. And like she's not saying that I'm bad, she's not saying that
No.
that the writing is bad, she's just wanting
No.
something a little bit different, and her vision is different from mine.
Or even like you're really close, which is actually one of the hardest notes I find to take, which is like, this is almost doing what you want. And you're like, but I've worked so hard. Why isn't it doing it? I worked so hard and it's still not there. It's like, that's the one that like sends me to the floor in tears.
Yeah, yeah, especially
Yeah.
those ones where like we love this so much but no.
And you're like,
You were
it's
almost.
hard not to take that personally. So like, good for you for like not like that. Takes, that took me work of like, I just wallow for a set amount of time. I
I
just have
do
a set
have
amount of time that I.
to. Yeah, I do have to like when somebody gives me, when especially when Christy or like my agent
Get
Andrea,
someone you actually respect and you like, you let in the feedback.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it does sit with me for a couple of days. Like I have to
Yeah.
like
Mm-hmm.
recalibrate or something,
Mm-hmm.
and like, okay, well, what are they talking about here about
Yeah.
this, and how can I fix it so that what they want, and is this really what I want, and all
Mm-hmm.
of those things.
It
So
does like takes a minute to like acclimatize.
yeah,
But then I find if you give yourself that time when you sit down, you're excited. Or like I'm excited. I don't know if you do, you get, you're like, oh, and then you start going. But like you
yeah.
have to let yourself like think and also be a little sad.
Yeah, you do have to be
And
a
then
little
you,
sad. Like I feel like you do have to take this time to be like, oh well, I guess it's not exactly what they wanted,
yeah.
but they want this, and I can
Yeah.
definitely do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I do think that you have to give yourself that space. And I definitely, I know for myself, like I do have to like process stuff, and it takes a
Yeah.
little bit of time. Like it takes time for me to like, okay, this is what she wants, and then I start, pulling in,
Mm-hmm.
being an engineer, taking stuff apart and putting it together.
Do you find that those like parts of your brain work together, like your writing brain and your engineering brain?
Um, yes and no.
Mm-hmm. I was just like curious. I was like, they're so different, but like I feel like they could also have overlaps in the Venn diagram circle.
I feel like when it comes to editing, I'm extremely good at editing. Like you
Mm-hmm.
give me this
Mm-hmm.
to do, and I'm like, okay, no problem. And
Yep.
I take my outline. Usually what I do is I do like a summary of each chapter, and then
Yeah.
I'll put notes on each summary being like, okay,
Okay.
take this out, edit this, and you put them in different colors, and then I highlighted it when I'm done.
Oh my
But
gosh, I love this.
yeah, just
Is it a
very,
doc or is it a spreadsheet? I have to
it,
pause here because I love a spreadsheet, so I just gotta know.
it's
Are we
usually
going full spreadsheet?
a document. So when I
Mm.
when I outline a synopsis, it's in a spreadsheet. But then
Okay.
when I'm doing the creative side, it's in a document, and I just make notes there, and I either like cross lines through, or I highlight it a different color,
Mm-hmm.
or and I usually like to take like if there's like 4 big points or whatever,
Yep.
I'll take one, and I'll be like, okay, this is what she wants. She wants the relationship scare staggered so that it builds up to a point. So then I'll go through the manuscript and be like, okay, well, here it needs to change. Here it
Here's a
needs to
good
change.
spot for it. Here it needs
Yeah.
to change. Here's the
Yeah.
rhythm. I can
And
see
so
it.
it's just a little bit more analytical and troubleshooty, like, which is what I do in my job.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
And you can make a list, right? Like you can make a list of like, here's what needs to be fixed. here's where I think it goes. Yeah, again, it's troubleshooting. It's list based. You can kind of tick it off in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so each chapter will be like, okay, in chapter 3, I need to do this, 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 this. And then it's very, I guess it's a little bit more clinical. So, so that it's, but like the
it's a totally different
is,
side of the drafting brain and the editing brain, totally different parts of my head.
Totally. Yeah. And so
yeah.
I think that's where I thrive a little bit is the editing side. Like, you tell me what to do, I'll do it. No problem.
Yep. Yeah. If I can make a list and check it off, I'm doing great. I just have to sit with the keyboard alone with my thoughts. I'm really not happy about it. I have to make something that I can't fix yet. I hate this. I think that's why I envy people who are fast drafters.
Right? There's some people who really love drafting. I mean, I like drafting too. It's just, it takes a lot longer for me to draft.
Yeah, it does. It takes me a lot longer. And I had to learn to like drafting, I think, for me. Like it wasn't the thing I naturally loved. It was the thing that I had to do to get to the part where I could really see what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So like making my peace was really important. I found, especially if you are an editor, because you like the control aspect of editing, right? Like the perfecting, the refining. There's just a lot of chaos in drafting that I think people who can really lean into that naturally is so cool. But you bring that into the editing, which is also when I love it.
That's what I can do.
Order Muppet.
I can do the edits.
I got it. I can fix anything.
Editing any day.
Oh man, I'm just like seeing if there's anything. Actually, this is something I always love to ask everyone. Even if it's just like a book launch, I will ask here, what are you the most proud of in this book?
I think, let's see, what am I the most proud of? I'm really impressed with myself by doing the rewrite. I think that I hit like almost every single thing that Christy wanted. All of her brilliant ideas, like I incorporated all of them. I'm really proud of that because like sometimes people don't really do it, and I feel like I can incorporate those things really well. So I'm proud of that, and I also am really proud of like how the emotion comes out. Like I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm crying" by the end of the first chapter. I'm like, yes,
"Oh, absolutely,
I did my job."
I was crying on like page 2. I don't know how they made the whole chapter. I was like, oh no.
Oh, that was scary. I have a friend, Leanne Young. She's like an agency sister, and she was like live texting me as she's reading. She's like, oh my gosh, why am I crying right now? She's like, curse you for making me cry at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, I first opened it and I was like, oh no. I did this to me. I picked this. I couldn't even like, I wanted to do that. I'm enjoying it. It's also, I don't know, in Mandarin the word for dad is the same one we use in Arabic. So like it's Baba. Yeah. Which I actually had a friend who spoke Mandarin, and when he heard me like on the phone and like saying something to my dad, he's like, we say that. Where I was like, that's how we say dad. I was like, sorry. We say it too.
That is so cool.
Yeah, so like it really hit like linguistically in the like that is what I call my dad on top of just like always having dad feels. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so great.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you connected with that.
Yeah, it was really beautiful and really beautifully done. And I think such a beautiful way of again weaving language and words into like natural to the characters' thoughts.
Yeah.
So. Well, that's a great thing to be proud of.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Let me see if we have. Yeah, I'm going to see if we have any questions, or people can drop them in the chat if they have them. I also have other questions I can ask about Miracle that I can usually pull up sometimes. Okay, I don't have any questions yet in the question box. So I will ask one of my next ones, and if anyone else has some more, feel free to drop them in. though there was someone who did comment that they also need time when they get notes to like process them. So we are not alone in
We're not
that.
alone. Just like people who are dealing grief are not alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, there's one which is, how did you find your publisher? If you want to handle that, or do you want me?
Oh, I can answer. So I have an agent. Her name is Andrea Cascardi at Transatlantic, and she was the one in traditional publishing. The agents are the ones who are submitting to editors at publishing houses. A lot of the big five, or whatever the count is now.
Whatever the count is now, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the bigger publishers are have like gatekeepers, and they only allow submissions from agents, and so that's how that happened. Like, she was submitting directly to different publishing houses, and Christy Chaviano, she's a senior editor at her own imprint under Little Brown. She was the one who who read the manuscript, liked it, gave me an R&R, ended up offering on the book, and that's how I got her.
And that's very common for traditional publishing in terms of
the order of things.
Like the order of operations. If you want traditional publishing, that's just sort of like finding the agent. The agent has contacts with editors at the publishing houses.
Yes.
Yeah, and then they read those. There was also a question about how you found your illustrator, or if like you found them, or if your publisher found them.
The publisher ended up doing all of the creative work. So Christy has a team of people, I think at Little Brown, and they were the one who commissioned the art on the inside. Like where is it?
Yeah,
I'll find a chapter.
Now I can't find. I was like,
I know now
all of them,
I can't
and now
find
I can't find a single.
Okay.
Okay, I found
like
there we go.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. So that's Vera Rosenberry. She did all the illustrations on the inside, and then they were the ones who also found Olga Lee, who did the cover, and she I actually knew that they wanted to find an artist who was Asian. And so I think they searched through a lot of their different, I don't know if they Googled or whatever, but they found her through Behance, I think. She has a profile on Behance, and there's a lot of like freelance artists on Behance. Like my sister who's here. Hi, Erin. Hi, and so yeah, they, so that's how they found Olga.
That's cool. And then you have a very lovely question, which is, do you have any other books coming out or any other stuff you're working on? Which is great.
I do. So I was contracted for 2 books, so I have another book coming out probably, I'm assuming like 2025, because it's not, I'm in the process of writing it. But it is about a girl, it's another middle grade. It's about a 11-year-old girl who is experiencing her parents' divorce and the after effects of the divorce. And her mom is an artist, her dad is an engineer, and she feels like she's kind of halved, and she's forced to go. She blames her dad for what happened, but for splitting their family up. And so she used to be like really into math and science and engineering, and now she claims she's like into art. But then she's forced to go to her dad's work, and she is starting to like reluctantly learn about the instrumentation. Like, it's very based on my job, but
that's very cool.
Yeah, all of the things that are at the helicopter company, and all of the sensors that they're learning, and so she has to kind of reconcile that part of herself with her dad and build a relationship back up with her dad. And she ends up finding a big problem and saves the day, and I think it's gonna be really fun.
That sounds really fun. Do you find that was almost like the internal dialogue as you're warring between like building helicopters and making art when you were doing that?
not as much. So my editor was the one with a brilliant idea who told me, it's like, you should write about your job. Like, there are hardly any books about engineering, and you are an engineer, and you should write
Mm-hmm.
that book. And I was like,
Also, it's
okay.
very cool that you help make helicopters. Like, again, just like sounds very cool.
It is very cool. Like, I love
Yeah,
my,
I mean, like keeps things in the air. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And so she was like, just, just do it. So I came up with a couple of three pitches, and she picked one, and so I expanded it. And so, like, right now I'm in the middle of drafting. And so yeah, it's been really fun, like trying to figure out how much information to give without being overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like getting too lost in the weeds of like exactly how a helicopter. So you probably put that in Death Valve and it's still funny. Like then it just becomes a little bit of a joke.
I don't think there's as much about the how the helicopter works, because like my job is instrumentation. We put like all the
Mm-hmm.
sensors on the
Mm-hmm.
helicopter to see like how something is
Mm.
performing.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
so
It's like a
yeah,
lot of safety stuff really on top of like it's how it's performing and like everything is like working correctly, right?
yeah, working correctly. And sometimes I'm an experimental flight test, and so they're like, we want to test this new blade. And so they replace one of the blades on one, there's like usually 4 to 6
Yeah.
blades on a rotor.
Yeah.
And so they'll replace one of them, and they want to know the performance of the aircraft. Like, if they're when they turn, does it have the same vibrations? Is the aircraft bending a certain way? So like all of
Yeah.
those small things, they're gonna be in that book. So yeah.
That's great. Do you find it's different writing under contract than it is like when you were writing hoping to be published? Like what's that difference is for you?
Yes, I definitely think there's a difference. You are more collaborative well, for me, like, I'm more collaborative with Christy on the direction that I'm going. And um, and yeah, like this process, because before I written the whole book and like
Mm-hmm.
submitted it and been
Mm-hmm.
like, look at this pretty thing.
Which is
Um,
what, yeah, like the first one is always like, I have to do the whole thing and then try to find, you submit it to the agent, all the agents maybe read it, maybe don't, then they maybe make an offer, then same thing happens to, yeah, so it's like you have this finished product that keeps getting honed and honed and honed.
Yeah, so this one is like, I'm in the middle. She wants to see like every 50 pages what I've done, and so it's just a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
than before, where it was like, okay, she's gonna give me edit notes, I'm gonna incorporate all of them, and here you go.
Mm-hmm.
Versus this one where,
Does it help to like, that's so interesting. I love seeing the way people work with their editors because it's always different, right? Like it's a working relationship between two
yeah,
people. And I've never done that with like every 50 pages. Does that help keep you from like, for me, like I would just like go off the rails. Does it like keep you in the like the right direction? I'm so curious
um,
about this now.
I I'm not sure. Like, I like this. So okay, I used to hate synopsises. I used to hate them. Hate, because like I would write, and then I would try to summarize everything, and it's just impossible, almost
Mm-hmm.
impossible
Mm-hmm.
to summarize something
Less
so
words is
big.
harder. Less words is always harder. Yeah, no,
Yes,
it just is. Yeah.
for sure.
It feels
And
like it should be easier, but it's harder
it's
because
way
it's less
harder.
words. Yeah. Yeah.
And so then my friend Remy Lai, who was also, she was a co-mentee during Pitch Wars. She was like, I love synopsises. You can just do a big outline, and then you follow it. And I was like, you're crazy. You
Yeah,
don't
it's
know
like,
what you're
like literally my
talking
pitch was
about.
like psycho.
It's like, I
Not kind.
hate that so much. And so then, but then like over the last couple of years, like I've written so many that I'm like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? This is kind of brilliant. Like, if you if you write a full like 4 to 5 page
Mm-hmm.
synopsis
Mm-hmm.
saying like, this happens and this happens and this
Mm-hmm.
happens and this
Mm-hmm.
happens, and then you think about like all of the small things that have to thread
Mm-hmm.
through, like even the B plots, it's kind of amazing, because then you don't have to go back and edit those things. Like, you have to refine
Yep.
stuff, but like, yeah, anyway, so that's what
You've
I'm doing.
thought about the big, someone described it once where like an outline is a short draft. And the second they did that, I was like, this makes me so much less angry about it. Like, and so much less stressed because drafts change. And if the idea is
Yeah,
like an outline is there to help you figure it out, and it can change, and it's not like rules you have to follow,
Yeah.
then it becomes another part of like the living document, and it was very freeing for me. I know that that's like the Indiana Jones joke of like calling the snake a rope in order to trick yourself, but it worked. It's like a Jedi mind trick, but it's a Jedi mind trick.
Like a Jedi mind trick. Like, it's not a synopsis.
It's
not a synopsis.
synopsis. It's a short draft.
It's a short draft.
It's a very short draft.
Very,
and
very
you're like, oh, well,
concise.
I love a shorter draft. Why does that work?
How does that work? But anyway, I really like them now. And now I write off of them.
I love that. See, you can grow. You can grow and change.
Everybody changes. People change. And it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, I think on that, I think that's a perfect note. But everyone, thank you so much for coming to talk to us, Karen. This is Miracle, which is a beautiful book, very hopeful about grief and love and music and baking pumpkin spice cookies. And yep, they're delicious. This book made me hungry, which is good. I feel like I needed comfort food. Like it's ultimately such a beautiful, hopeful story. Please check it out, everyone. And thank you for joining us. And I will see you on the other side.
Thank you, Amina.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.